Hello. Thank you very much for coming. Firstly, I should say I'm going to speak in English, so apologies for that, and thank you for trying to understand me. And if you can't understand me, then just assume what I'm saying is really interesting and clever and tell your friends about how great it was. And if you can understand me, don't disillusion them. My name is Jon Ingold. I'm the narrative director of Inkle. We're a pretty small independent developer from the UK who make narrative games. And we've been around about 15 years now. These are the games that we've made. It's not quite all the games we've made, but it's kind of most of them. I tend to put this slide up at the start because usually when I talk to a room of people, everybody's heard of maybe a couple of them, like 2 or 3, but very few people have heard of all of them. And usually the 2 or 3 that people have heard of are completely different depending on who you happen to be. Because one thing that we do, much to the irritation of anyone who tries to follow us as a studio, is we always make very different games. So they've given me a laser pointer so I can do this. Hang on. There we go. That's nice. That one is a 3D adventure game. That one is a text-based game. That's a platformer. That's a tactics game. That's a sort of D&D game book thing. That I'm going to talk about today, so I won't spoil it. That was done with Google and is about paintings. Like, they're all quite different, really. And that's because of the thing that I said at the start. We're a narrative studio and we want to tell you stories, but we're not really interested in the gameplay that much, actually. Gameplay is a thing that we use rather than a thing that we focus on. Not all devs do that, but that's what we happen to do. Anyway, I particularly want to talk today about that game in the middle, partly because, well, we released it 3 weeks ago, so I'm trying desperately to tell everybody in the world that it exists, because now that Elon Musk has broken Twitter, it's very hard to tell anybody about anything. So hi, everyone. I came all this way to say that exists. I used to be able to do that in 2 seconds. Now it's taken 3 days. So yay. But also because it's actually genuinely interesting. So it is called Expelled, and it looks a bit like this. And you play as Verity Amersham, who is this lady here, also here. There we go. And she is a student in the 1920s at an English boarding school. That's a kind of school where you have to stay there day and night and you live there. And she's just been accused of trying to murder another pupil by throwing them out of a window. And your job as the player is to prove her innocence and avoid getting expelled by any means necessary, which very quickly means finding somebody else to blame and blaming them. It's essentially an adventure game, but we tell it, as you can kind of tell, I think, through this sort of visual novel style interface with choices rather than a point and click interface. And there's a bunch of reasons why we do that, mostly speed, because you don't have to walk around the environment. You can just get on with the game. The other thing is we feel it makes the dialogue more immediate. A lot of the game is about talking to characters and arguing with them. And we don't want you to have to walk up to a character, start a conversation, go through a menu. We want them to just be right there. But actually, that's not what makes the game interesting, I don't think. And that's not really what I want to talk about. And if you've played our game Overboard from 2001, you'll notice it's exactly the same interface we did there. So it's not even new, right? We just ripped ourselves off. But what is interesting about it, and is interesting about Overboard, is this. There we go. It's this thing here at the top. I love this laser pointer. It's so fun. Which indicates a core mechanic of the game, which is timing. Most adventure games, and most games in general, ignore the existence of time. Time is obviously really important. It's a fundamental part of the human experience. We all worry about it all the time. But in games, time is a very reassuring and safe thing. It is usually either completely, totally fixed in place. So this is Monkey Island, obviously. And if you go to Melee Island, it's permanently nighttime. And if you go to Monkey Island, it's permanently sunny and it's daytime. That's just how it works. When we play that game, we don't even really question it. It's just, well, obviously it's like that. Monkey Island is a nice sunny beach. Of course, it's always daytime in the sunshine, in the same way that in Spain, the sun is always shining, as I discovered this weekend. If games don't do this, and it's obvious why they do it, right? But if they don't do this, then they do a day-night cycle, which is this thing that developers build that's there to make it look really cool when you're riding your horse and the sun is going down into the sunset. It's also there to make sure that the screenshots look quite varied, so the game looks bigger than it really is. And it's also there to do absolutely nothing else at all, if at all possible. So the cycle, if you're lucky, if you've got a big budget game, will affect which NPCs are visible in the world. Are the shopkeepers outside or not? That kind of big scale decision. Usually it doesn't have a real mechanical effect or anything that actually affects you as a player. You know, no one playing The Witcher actually uses the meditate button to wait for the right time to attack. At least I don't think they do. I mean, I never did. Maybe you did. I didn't. But then I thought The Witcher was a game about bashing monsters, so I would just charge in and bash monsters. I didn't even read the book, and I never used the potions, so I just basically was rubbish at it. And the last time I played Assassin's Creed, which might well have been Black Flag, actually, I'm pretty sure that when you do a story mission, they just kick the sun across the sky so that it's in the right place for the bit of plot that they want to tell you. So even if you did use the meditate button, which I'm not even sure they actually have, they just put the sun where they want it to be. So that's fine. And yeah, you know, this is totally understandable. 4 dimensions is far too many. 3 dimensions is already too many. If you give a game to someone who doesn't understand a game controller, they start tilting their head upside down and getting lost and confused. People get stuck within tiny rooms when they don't understand 3D worlds. So 4 dimensions is far too many. Time is this whole additional thing that we have to deal with, and it comes with some really major problems, which I had better list. So firstly, time is, it's limited. It runs out if you waste it, and game players waste an enormous amount of time. They fall off things and they look into the same corner twice to check that they haven't missed something, and they repack their inventory endlessly, and they jump up and down on the spot to watch the clothing flap around, and then they go, look at that, isn't that great? And enormous amounts of time go by on this sort of pointless stuff. But if you waste time and it's limited, then you haven't got it anymore, and suddenly you might be stuck. Everybody hates timed missions, right? When you have to drive to a place in GTA and you've got 35 seconds to do it, and you take 37 and you fail, everybody hates that. No one has ever thought that was a good idea. So it's pretty understandable, right? Time is also outside of the player's control, and players hate things that are outside of their control. They really despise that. When we use a computer, we want to be the little operator who gets to set all the dials and press all the buttons and be in charge. That's why I bought a computer, so I could be in charge of something. It was that or run a post office. So the player doesn't have a dedicated button on their controller to tell time what to do. All the other dimensions of the game, they have buttons for that job. There's a button to position the camera exactly where you want it, and a button to position Mario exactly where you want him, except if you've got Joy-Con drift, which I guess is the other problem, that time is independent of you. It's out of control and it moves on its own. So when you're playing a game, time just does what it does. If you go to make a cup of tea, time doesn't care. It's genuinely, it's broken. It feels broken. So all in all, time's kind of annoying, and life would be a lot easier if we didn't have to think about it. But, except, spoiler, except at Inkle, we make narrative games. And as I said, the core idea that we start with is that there's just enough gameplay to allow us to tell you the story that we want to tell you in a way that makes you feel involved with that story. That's what the gameplay is there for. It's there to draw you in and to keep you in and to keep you compelled so that we can tell you a story. As I said, that is not how every game developer works. It's not how insert yourself into an RPG type game works. That's go and do what you like type game. That's not what we do. We do I want to tell you a story and I want you to feel like you're part of it. It's more theater than anything else in some ways. But what is a story? When I say we want to tell you a story, what does that actually mean? Because our definition of story, of narrative in games, is epically wide and kind of includes absolutely everything. When you ask people for their favorite narrative experiences, some people will say, I don't know, unpacking, which has no writing in it. Or they'll say journey, which is just all vibes, really. And then some people will say Katamari Damacy, or Dancy, however you say that game. People come up with these kind of crazy left field ideas of what narrative means to them. And that's fine. That's great. But, well, this is my talk, so I want to tell you about what I think story is. So, for example, this thing that I flashed up earlier, this is a Far Side cartoon by Gary Larson. depending on whether you know the far side, it might take you a moment just to absorb it and to understand the point of the image. He makes quite cryptic cartoons, but hopefully you've all seen the point. Right, this is not a story. It's awesome, it's lovely, it's brilliant, it's very funny. It's not a story because a story cannot happen in a single instant. That's a thing a story can't do. A picture like this does not tell a story. People always say, oh, pictures tell incredible stories. They don't, that's the wrong verb. This doesn't tell a story, it infers a story, which you tell inside of your own head. And that's very cool. What an amazing technology. This one graphic made you all tell yourself a story. Aren't you clever? What wonderful brains you have. Good job. But it's not storytelling, at least not the way that I see storytelling, because, well, in my opinion, there's a craft to storytelling. There's a skill to it, right? You get people who tell stories in pubs and they go on and on and on, and you want them to stop and they won't stop, but they keep going. And then you get people who tell stories, you know, in other contexts, who are just gripping, and you always want to hear what they say next. There's a genuine skill to the way that you deliver a story, which matters significantly to whether or not the story is worth hearing. And if there is a craft to storytelling, that means that a good storyteller can probably tell a story better than you can in your head when you look at that picture. It's less efficient. That was really quick, brilliant, great, you can move on. But it's also arguably, possibly less good. So I think storytellers do a good job, and that's why they exist and have existed for thousands of years. So, for example, here are two books, one of which is a story, and see if you can guess which one I think it is. So they're both by a very good author. No one is talking about this as a skill issue. Obviously, the author of both of these books is quite capable of writing gripping stuff. One of these is a story. The Lord of the Rings it's a genre piece, but it's a classic piece of fiction. It's a classic story that's well told. The Silmarillion is not. I'm not exactly sure what the Silmarillion actually is. It shocked the heck out of me when I tried to read it when I was 10, and it was nothing like the Lord of the Rings. It's kind of basically a D&D lore manual, essentially. They just didn't exist at the time, so he didn't know that that's what he should have called it. If he had called it that, it would have sold millions more, and he would have been a much wealthier man. But he didn't know about adding dice to things, so he didn't do that. In storytelling terms, the Silmarillion's important. It's kind of soil. It's like soil. It's not something that you're supposed to consume directly, but it's something from which other things can grow. So I'm going to beat this metaphor absolutely to death. But basically, if the Lord of the Rings is a tree, right? The Lord of the Rings is a tree, then it grows from the soil that is the Silmarillion, or the Siltmarillion, but that's a very specific English pun that may not land very well, so we'll just move on. And the feelings that the Lord of the Rings evokes, all the reasons to enjoy it as a story, are sort of up at the top. Oh, laser pointer time. Here, it's kind of the fruit of the tree. So when you're trying to give a player feeling and satisfaction of a story, when you're being a storyteller, you probably want to lay down some soil, and then you want to grow something out of that soil. And then if you do a good job at the top of it, there'll be some fruit that the player will go, oh, I love that. I took that with me and I kept it with me. That was a pearl. That was a jewel. That was a shining fruit from this story. And, you know, as you're going along, you might want to add more soil. That would be fair enough. You might find that you need some more, and you might want to prune your tree and shape your story so that it delivers better fruit. Those are all reasonable things to do. But fundamentally, we don't ask people to eat the soil. That's a bad idea. That's not good farming. So this process of growth that starts from the soil, builds the tree to produce the fruit, that is storytelling. And crucially, it's about growth, right? That's the core thing. It's about growth, which is to say it's about change over time. So stories are really about change over time. They have to be, which for any mathematicians in the audience, that means that the units of storytelling are meters per second squared, which is surprising but true. And this is fine, right? This is all fine. This is nothing new or exciting. In fact, it's very much a solved problem in games. because we have a solution that as game developers we use almost all the time. Again, for the benefit of any mathematicians, we project the fourth dimension down onto the other three, so the tesseract of the storytelling contraption becomes a cube, which is much easier to assimilate. For the benefit of anyone who doesn't speak English mathematics quite as fluently, all I'm saying really is that we tell the game where each level is going to be in time and we fix it. So if this level happens in the morning and then a bit later this level happens in the afternoon and then this level happens in the evening and then the final level of the game happens in hell where you fight demons, and there isn't really a concept of time in hell, so it doesn't really matter what time of day it is. And that's the arc of all computer games, right? They all do that. It's all morning, afternoon, evening, hell every single time. So it's very much the solved problem. And that's fine. It's true for epic adventure movies as well. If you watch an Indiana Jones film, well, it's nighttime when he's in the Hong Kong place, it's morning when he's on the plane, it's dinner time when he's eating monkey brains, whatever happens in the movie. And you see it in the script, it's all scene 12, exterior, night. We lock the time down so that it's a fixed problem and we can ignore it. Great. But it doesn't work for a particular kind of story. It doesn't work for intimate stories. So it doesn't work for soap operas. It doesn't work for detective stories. It doesn't work for office dramas. It doesn't work for anything which is a quiet human story, which isn't about an epic journey into hell or anywhere else, really. And in real life, most of the really interesting things that happen to any of us happen in an extremely small pool of locations. We don't mostly travel across the world to discover the truth about ourselves. Most of us do that in a cafe one Tuesday afternoon, having a very significant conversation with a clever aunt or something like that, something quiet and small. And I would argue that intimate stories require intimate spaces to tell them in. In theatre, I said before that Inkle's quite theatrically minded, which I think we are. A good playwright makes everything happen within a single room. That's part of the core skill of theatre. And incidentally, this is why all the recent detective deduction games that have become very popular, so the Oberdins and the Her Stories and the Root Trees Are Dead and Type Help and all of Golden Idol as well, really, they're all detective stories that are about something that happened to somebody else, because detective stories require a specific human drama, like a really fixed point human drama. But having that drama happen around the player is really difficult. Whereas finding all the evidence in a suitcase and then rootling through it, or aboard an empty sailing ship and rootling through it, is much easier to build. And that's why those games do that. So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. It's a really efficient and clever way to make a detective story into something you can play. But that kind of story, the Oberdin Her Story, is a bit like the dinosaur cartoon I showed you earlier, in that it's not really storytelling, because the storytelling is done inside your head. It makes you feel very clever, but it's not delivered in the manner of a story. So I'm a storyteller. I want to tell it to you. I want to be there when it gets told. So how can we do that? Well, I think there's a way, obviously, and it's about embracing time into our storytelling. And of course, adventure games have actually been doing this for ages. It's not an original thought. We've been doing it for ages. So I wanted to just flick through some examples to show you what I mean. There's been a few recent games that hinge on the passage of time. So Elsinore was quite good. Outer Wilds did very well and was very famous. 12 Minutes was relatively famous, but I don't know that it did as well. But for some real solid inspiration, I want to go a bit further back. So let us abuse the name of the talk and go back in time. And take you back to 1997. And this game, which is the Blade Runner game, it was recently fixed up and remastered, and it's on GOG, and you can play it now. And it's pretty good, actually. It's quite a good game. And it tries to do a lot of ambitious things with branching narrative and with randomized elements to the detective work and multiple endings, some of which are really difficult to get, but they're there. But none of that is the thing I wanted to talk about. And curiously, none of those things are the things that the game itself wanted to talk about, because when it came out, they didn't mention the multiple endings or the randomized narrative on the box. They did this. They put this on the box. Oh, in fact, I think I actually, look at that. I didn't know I was going to have a laser pointer. They marketed it as the world's first real-time 3D adventure, which is particularly weird because there is nothing real-time about this game whatsoever. It's also not 3D, it's entirely 2D layers, but let's ignore that for the moment. The only thing that's even vaguely real-time is that sometimes when you go to a location, you'll see one of the other Blade Runner characters. Blade Runner is a policeman who hunts androids, in case people haven't seen this movie that's like 50 years old now. Anyway, you'll see one of these characters in the background walking around, and we are supposed to believe that they got to the scene first and they collected some evidence before you and they changed the course of the narrative. But none of that is true. They don't ever do that. It's just an NPC who appears in the room. That's it. That's the only real-time element. But they still thought that it was an interesting enough idea that they wanted to put it on the box. So that shows that people thought this was a good direction, if nothing else. However, for a game that actually does some actual real-time narrative, we have to go to The Last Express by Jordan Bencher. If you've ever heard me talk about games before, ever, I talk about this game all the time, so I apologize if it's repetitive, but I'll just fill you in quickly in case you don't know the game. So the basic idea of The Last Express is you're aboard a train, it's crossing Europe, World War I is just about to break out, there's been an assassination, and all the passengers aboard have secrets. And you need to snoop around and find things out and basically survive this journey. And while the game is broken into little episodes, little chunks of time, the clock within each episode is always running. And the passengers have schedules. They move around the train and do things. So they'll go to the restaurant car, and then they'll go back to their cabin, and then they'll go off to the smoking car, and so on. So you might need to, well, go to the restaurant car and overhear what they're saying, or you might need to go to the smoking car so that you can talk to them when there isn't someone around. That's very straightforward. The cleverer puzzle that The Last Express does is when you realize that half the time you need to be where the character isn't. So if you want to search their cabin, you have to wait until they've left their cabin so that you can break into it before they come back, which is just a really elegant use of the real-time thing. The pinnacle of the game, the real kind of bit where it is just showing off, but it does it so beautifully, is in the middle there is a violin concert given by one of the characters, and all the characters gather in the smoking car to listen to this lady play the violin. It lasts about 20 minutes, and you can sit and you can listen to the whole performance, and you can watch the violinist play, or you can watch the reactions of the other characters in the room as they hear this music, and they feel stuff and think about stuff. You shouldn't do any of that. You should run around the train breaking into their cabins and causing mischief. That's actually the point. But you can sit and watch a full violin concert inside a video game. I don't know of any video game, except possibly Fortnite, I suppose, which has done anything like this ever. And what's even more remarkable about it is it's not actually a 3D scene at all. It's more of a mist style layout. So the characters are kind of animated and laid on top, but because it's the 90s and they don't have any mocap, it's all filmed and then rotoscoped, which is when you paint over cells of film to get the animated character to match the filmed image. And they did it from every angle so that you can move the camera around in this sort of static mist style way and still watch this violin concert being animated in real time. It's incredible the amount of work they went to make it look like a 3D experience when it was actually just 2D from lots of angles. None of that helps whatsoever with the gameplay, and the complexity of building it means that although the script is very well written, the design is in many ways of the game very much too simple. It has to be lots of pass-fail gates because they just couldn't afford to build much branching. So for a more subtle implementation of real-time mechanics, it's actually helpful not to go forwards in time, but to go even further back, because the thing that makes The Last Express a kind of compromise game is that its artistic ambitions are too high. So let's look at a game which has even lower artistic ambitions, which is one of my favorites of all time, which is this. It's called The Witness, and it's a text adventure game from 1983 made by Infocom. The player is a hard-boiled detective investigating a murder in a house, which, if I've remembered right, has only got 3 people in it, so it's not that hard to work out who done it. But the evidence that you need to prove the case consists of things that you discover almost entirely by being in the right place at the right time in this house to overhear a conversation or to witness somebody doing something which gives you the clue of what's going on with them. So maybe a telephone will ring in the house and somebody answers it, and you have to get to the other telephone to pick it up and listen into the conversation, which is a thing that old telephones used to be able to do, which is not a thing that most young people know. So I don't know whether you're young or not, but there we go. Similarly, if somebody's going to come into a room and sort of look in the safe, then you need to be hiding behind the sofa so that you can see them do it. It's all presented through this interface on the right, which is text, and you type in instructions for what to do. When you know how to play these games, it's a very free form and expressive interface. When you don't, it's completely brutal and unplayable. It is a deeply unfair game in that there's really no way to know where you're supposed to be without just wandering around the map randomly, hoping to catch sight of something useful. But the ultimate solution isn't too bad. It's not too complicated. All the key events are very well clued. So if there is an interesting scene in the living room, the person will drop something at the end of it and you'll hear the smash wherever you are. So you think, oh, I've missed something. I need to go back and find out what that thing was. So it's quite nicely done. Interestingly, The Witness, which was made in 1983, is actually not their first game that did this, which I think was Deadline in 1982, which has a much more complicated plot. It has much more characters. They move around on much more complicated schedules. And I wasn't able to solve Deadline on my own because there's just too much of that magic timing involved. You have to be in just the right place at just the right time with no idea that you need to be there. It's a much less elegant game, but as a piece of coding, it's very impressive that they managed to make this in 1982. One thing about both of these games that's worth noting is while the characters move around on timelines, so they might be in this room at this time, and then they'll go here, and then the gardener will go to the garden while the maid will go to the kitchen, that kind of thing. Most of those timelines are fixed. You can't really do very much to derail a character or to change where they're going to go. And when they move around the house, they're not paying attention. So if you drop a bloody knife on the floor of a room that a character is going to walk through, they'll just walk straight past it. They won't see it. So they haven't really simulated a world. They haven't created a kind of Hitman style sandbox thing. They've really just taken an adventure game and broken it across a timeline. So if you're trying to imagine what it's like to play, it's actually a bit like playing a kind of complicated trap room from a Tomb Raider game, or maybe a bit of the Outer Wilds. So you run and you rerun a sequence until you learn exactly what order things move in and perfect the sequence of moves to get through the various elements of the trap, and then you've won the level and you've solved the game. So while neither of these games are actually time loop games, they kind of feel like time loop games to play because you have to roll them over and over again and memorize it and become the guy from Groundhog Day to learn the golden path through. Fine. Whew. I want to talk about one more old school, boring looking, terrible screenshots, no day-night cycle real-time game before I move on, which is this thing called Border Zone, which is a bit of a curio, but is actually brilliant. So what Border Zone does is it distills this design into something really focused. It is also genuinely a real-time game. So remember, these games you play by typing commands. Well, Border Zone runs in real time, so things happen while you're waiting to type. They happen while you're typing. So if you're a slow typer, people will come up the corridor of this train and arrest you if you can't get the words right. And because it's one of these typing-based games, where if you type a command the game doesn't understand, it goes, no. You can lose a lot of time from just not knowing how the buttons work or not knowing what to say, and this game doesn't care. It will just come and arrest you anyway if you're playing it wrong. That aspect of the design doesn't really work at all. It's just frustrating and silly, and these games were turn-based anyway, so it really doesn't need it. But what it does do brilliantly is it does small scenes with real focus. So for example, the opening of the game, you're aboard a train, you're heading towards the border, it's the Cold War, you've just been handed a secret document, but the border police are coming to look for it. You have just a few minutes to find a way of disposing of the document in such a way that you can recover it later, but it won't be found on your person. There's only a couple of locations, there's only a couple of things you can interact with, but the timing is absolutely critical. Here's an example you can see in more detail. This is from the second chapter of the game, and it's the schedule of events that happens. So it's, 1749, you wake up, 1755, a patrol car pulls up, 1 minute later, guards knock on the door of the hut, 2 minutes later, the guard breaks off and patrols around the hut, 1 minute later, the backside of the cabin. It's a full timetable, right? And reading it through, it feels like the outline of a thriller, right? You can start to imagine okay, where are the opportunities for gameplay here? Oh, well, if the guard has just slipped round the back of the hut, that's my time to slip in. But then I mustn't leave until he's come back round. But hang on, there's another guy moving around, so I need to dodge him as well. And I need to work my way around all of these things. It's really focused. It's just one tiny location with a couple of people in it. It's nothing like Deadline or The Witness, where you have a whole house and all these events happening and you can miss things. You're right there in the moment solving this tight problem. It's also a really great marriage of form and content, because this is a game about being a spy. And if you're a spy, what you're supposed to do is always escape in the nick of time. You're supposed to be absolutely brilliant at just jumping off the train when it's about to go off the cliff, or just saying exactly the right thing, or just turning the corner of your car so you don't clip that bollard but sneak past it. Spies are really good at doing everything precisely correctly, and that's what this game is all about. So, all of which brings me to the design of Overboard, which is not the game I started saying I was going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. If you haven't played it, Overboard is a reverse-style murder mystery. So you play a woman who has just pushed her husband into the mid-Atlantic off a boat and now needs to cover up the murder. We made Overboard during the second lockdown in the UK because we were feeling miserable and we wanted to cheer ourselves up. And it kind of resonated with people because I think at the time, the fantasy of murdering your family and getting away with it kind of felt like something people could kind of get behind. It's set entirely aboard a ship. This is the map of the ship. So it has just a few rooms and a few characters and you can see what rooms they're in. And it takes place over the course of a single day. So you have 8 hours to produce enough evidence so that when the boat reaches New York, when it reaches harbor, and they come aboard and they discover that one of the passengers is missing, they're going to arrest the person who they think is responsible. So you need to make sure that person isn't you. Time is intrinsic. It's critical to the telling of that story in the same way as it is in The Last Express. You can't tell the story of Overboard in a level by level, each room is a fixed time kind of way, because the player needs to be deviating from what's normal to survive. That's the whole point. So if at 8 o'clock in the morning all the passengers go to the restaurant car for breakfast, the player absolutely needs to not do that and go somewhere else and start fixing the things which are going to point to them being the murderer. They need to be destroying evidence. They need to be setting things up, not doing what they're supposed to do. It's that idea from The Last Express of wanting to be in places where other characters aren't. One thing we also wanted to do was we wanted to keep that thing from Border Zone, where when you're inside a scene, time is relevant too. So say you break into someone's cabin and you're trying to plant some evidence on them or find something useful to incriminate them with. We want the player to search the room quickly and badly. We want them to get it wrong. And then we want them to escape in the nick of time before the owner of the cabin comes back again. And then we want to try and trap you with that. So we fill the cabins with books and poems and interesting little things to look at in the hope that you'll break into the cabin intending to do something clever and quick, get distracted reading somebody's bedside novel, and then get found when the person comes in and go, oh God, I did do that, because that's funny. So we deliberately kind of want you to waste your time in situations where you really shouldn't waste your time. And then the player can master that and fight against it, and it's quite fun. So to make Overboard work, we built a very quick and rubbish system for telling characters where do they need to be at a certain time. So, you know, this character here is in the restaurant at 8 a.m. and then at 9 a.m. they're in the cabin, and so on. And then, having built that, we hacked in a system that allowed you to divert where they were going to be. So if you arrange to meet her, she won't go to her cabin at 9, she'll go to the upper deck at 9. Fine. And then we hacked that system again so that you could push people overboard and generally murder them by saying that they would get diverted to a location called Underwater. And when they went to the location called Underwater, they would stay there for the rest of the day and you couldn't talk to them. Taking cues from The Witness and Deadline, we built a lot of right place, right time puzzles, so that once a player knows that, for example, a character will be up on deck early in the morning and will find some crucial evidence, then the player knows, okay, on my next run, I need to get there early and fix that. And one other interesting thing emerged, which was waiting. The concept of not doing anything became significant. So you might go to a location and choose to not do anything, because if I don't do something, then that character will. So say I've planted a bit of evidence on the floor, I just wait for them to find it. I don't give it to them because it's more effective if they find it themselves. Or I wait for someone to just go away so that I can do something that I don't want to be overseen. And that was quite exciting. These puzzles can get quite tough to solve. In an Infocom game like Border Zone, it was very normal to have to do a run and start over from the beginning and work out the exact sequence to win. You really can't win Border Zone without playing it numerous times. But as I said before, I quite like that actually, because over the course of the replay, you develop the character that you're supposed to be. So in Border Zone, you're basically James Bond. By the time that you're playing that game well, you are James Bond. You're managing to dodge every bullet. You're managing to just miss every fist fight. You never get seen. You never get spotted. The alarm never goes off. You feel super competent. And it's not a cutscene. And it's not a quick time event, it's genuinely you doing it. And by the end of that sequence, you go, wow, I'm really good at this. I'm totally ninja. Similarly in Overboard, the player is using the multiple runs that they have to go through to become Veronica, this main character, who is a sort of perfect villain who always appears at the right moment and always knows just the right thing to say to twist someone around her little finger. And she always knows how to get away with a lie, however ridiculous that lie is, because the player has put the time into becoming that character. So we think of it less as a groundhog sort of time loop game and more like a rehearsal process. The player turns up on stage, they rehearse their character until they live that character, and then they can really enjoy the final performance. The final result of all this is something that's like a kind of like a clockwork machine. So we shipped it, we shipped Overboard, and we thought, wow, this is amazing. We've built this system that lets us create dramatic, theatrical games with lots of characters who go around having ideas and you can manipulate them. This isn't the template for one game. This is a template for thousands of games. This is a whole new genre of games. This is amazing. We should make another one straight away. So after Overboard shipped, we started writing Expelled, set in a 20s boarding school. There are teachers, there are students, they're trapped in this weird old school in the countryside, so they can't leave. There's a crime to investigate. Everyone has a timetable. They have lessons to go to, and assembly and gym and things like that. And because Overboard had been really quick to write, I assumed that Expelled would be as well. And I was totally wrong. And Expelled took 4 years. And the reason was that aboard the ship in Overboard, characters have these very simple, very luxurious lives. They eat breakfast, they go to their cabin to read a book, they go to the smoking car to smoke a cigarette. They just sort of sit and chill all day because they're rich and they're on a boat and they've got nothing to do. They're mostly alone and they take decisions by themselves. So what Carstairs knows doesn't really affect what Major Singh is going to do. And they might, if they're sitting together, share a piece of information about what they've seen or what they know, but they very rarely share a piece of information which causes another one of the characters to go off and do something else. So you don't get that effect where I tell you something, you go over there, tell another character something, who then does something different, and either player don't see it happening. That just didn't happen in Overboard. In a girls' school, however, that sort of thing happens all the time. People are constantly interacting with each other in different combinations, and gossip is a huge thing. You can't write around it. It's completely ridiculous that girls wouldn't discuss things with each other that were important and exciting, and it was absurd that they wouldn't change what they were doing based on what they know. Teenagers are fun to write about because they make impetuous, impulsive decisions. That's what makes them great characters. But it means that if one of them discovers that their friend is hurt, they are going to skip maths class and run and see if their friend is okay. And if their friend is not okay, they're going to go and get the nurse to help their friend. But if they can't find their friend because of some reason, then they're going to go off hunting the school for them. And they're going to ask everyone they meet to help them do that. And then everyone's skipping maths class. And now the maths teacher is thinking, where are all my students? And needs to go off and find them. So she'll start hunting the school to find them. And then they'll have to have an argument about it, which you might be in the room for, but you might not be in the room for, and so on and so on. So it doesn't even matter if the player is seeing what's happening. We have to model all of that complex interaction. Otherwise, our school doesn't feel like a school and our characters don't feel like characters. Because of this problem, right? It's this guy It's this guy. This is a generic NPC from a generic open world game. I found it on Google. I don't know what game it is. You win a cookie if you know. I don't know. But it's that thing when you're in an open world game and you go down the road and there's a guy with an exclamation mark standing above his head, and you go to talk to him and you say, "Are you okay?" And he says, "No, I'm not okay. I've lost my son. My son has disappeared. My literal son has gone missing. Could you please help me?" And you say, "Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll help you." And you wander off to help you. And he says, "Oh, great. I'll just stand here because I said I would, because I told my son I would be here. So I'm going to be here." And days go by, weeks go by. I go off to the entire other continent and bash a whole load of monsters over here. And this guy's still standing there going, "I hope my son comes back. I really hope he comes back. It's very important to me. I said I would be here and I'm a good dad. So I'm going to stay right here. I'm not going to go looking for him. No, that would be too risky. I'm not going to get the entire village to scour the fields to see if we can find him face down, shoes up in a ditch. That would be ludicrous. I'm going to stand here in this spot." And when you come back 3 weeks later, he's still there. He's still crying. He's very well hydrated, this guy. But he's, but he hasn't fixed his heart. No, he's still worried about it. I mean, presumably he's been checking WhatsApp or playing Balatro or something, but he's still there. And then when you finally find his son and you say, "Oh, your son's in the pub down the road. He's just completely tanked on this frothy beer that they do there." Then the father goes, "Oh, thank you. I will go to him." And then he's okay to leave. That is the classic computer game guy. And that's fine, right? Because The Witcher, this is not a guy from The Witcher, but I remember this guy in The Witcher. It's fine, because The Witcher isn't about this guy by the road. The Witcher is about monster bashing. That's not a problem. But if your game is about people, if it's actually supposed to be about people, then if you put this guy in your game's not about people anymore, unless you have a very strange idea of what people are like. If we're going to make games about people, we need them to be like people. They have to take decisions with their own actual brains, and they have to do that in real time as what you might call the information landscape changes. Otherwise, the game feels hollow. We require, sorry, there's quite a lot of this. We require people like people. So for Expelled, we tried to use the system from Overboard to build our school, and the code we had just didn't work. It did not work. In fact, the fact that Overboard works is a miracle. There's several bugs in there. I don't know how it survived, whatever. It turns out there was just an enormous amount of extra decision making that we needed to handle, because all of the characters have not just a place to be at a certain time, but they also have a belief about what's going on in the world and what they're supposed to be doing. And that belief can change as a result of their interactions with other people and what they see and what they discover and what they learn and what they share. So we had to rebuild that system completely multiple times, which is why it took 4 years. And even that wasn't enough, because it isn't enough to have people like people in our game. We need to have what I've catchily termed people like you. The other thing we needed was we needed our characters to not just be reactive, but to be proactive, which I don't know if that's a commonly known word outside of England, but it just means that you take decisions yourself. Right. Thank you. Everybody's nodding. Brilliant. Well done, you. Your language system is clearly amazing. In English, they taught me one line of Spanish when I was 14, which is "y tengo 14 años," which I still remember, but it's not very useful. I was telling someone earlier, and they said, "Well, it's fine. You just swap the number." And I was like, "Well, I don't know the right number, so I can just say y tengo años," but it's not very helpful. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. What was I talking about? Oh, yeah, right. So we need our characters to be proactive, right? It's not enough for them to be on a schedule until they get knocked off by the player. That works fine for Border Zone. It works fine for Hitman. It works fine for a detective game when the detective calls on someone's house. The reason that works is because the protagonist in those situations is not part of that world. A detective comes into a stately home and messes everybody up with their questions and knocks them off their comfortable track and disrupts them. James Bond comes in and slips away unnoticed. Hitman comes in and, well, kills somebody and goes away. But the point is, they're outsiders who cause an effect, poke, 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 and then disappear. They're not part of the world. In a school or any setting like that, like an office or whatever, every person, every student is connected to every other student, including the player themselves, including the protagonist. And we need to keep proving that to the player over and over again. Otherwise, the world feels hollow. It feels like everyone is here just for your benefit, like you're the only real person and they're all machines. So we then had to spend a lot of time making sure that other characters came and accosted you. So Fifi, the French student, will track you down to argue about the play, and you have to talk to her because she's a prefect, even though you want to go off and solve this other problem that you have. And little Susan will run over to talk to you excitedly about prize giving, and Matron will come and haul you out of lessons because she thinks you're guilty, and Bridget will walk into the library early on in the game and see things she shouldn't see, and so on. These characters are constantly up in your face, causing problems for you directly because they know who you are and they have assumptions about you from before the start of the game. And when we get all of this in, hopefully what we end up with is a world in which the player can legitimately expect that social things will work, like social consequences will happen when they take social actions. So if I tell character X something about their friend, then they'll go to place Y. Bad iPad. Okay. If I tell character X something about character Y, they'll go to this place and they'll do something, and I can assume that they will actually do that because I believe that they're real people. I believe I can get inside their heads and I can understand what they're going to do. So Expelled is a bit less of a clockwork machine, really, like Overboard or The Last Express, and I like to call it, very grandiosely, it's a narrative physics engine. It's not narrative Lego, it's a narrative physics engine, because a well-placed piece of information can create this billiard ball, this snooker ball effect where it pings off into things and causes consequences quite far down the line. And sometimes they're useful consequences, and sometimes they're disastrous consequences, which anyone who's worked with a physics engine will know is what physics engines do, right? Sometimes they're great, and sometimes your entire building falls down and you don't know why. So that's Expelled. That's how we built Expelled. That's what we did with real time. How does Expelled, look, it's out now. How does it add to real-time games as a genre? I'm not sure. I think on balance, the school setting might have been overkill, actually. There was a lot of fun to be had in the stability of Overboard, in the fact that you could be really predictable about where people were, so you could be a bit more of a strategist in how you dealt with it. I think the perfect design might be somewhere between the two. I love having a protagonist who's really grounded and embedded in the world, but it would be nice if the characters were a little bit less erratic and a little bit less flying off the handle on everything you do. So maybe we'll make another one that somehow squares that circle. I'm just worried that it'll take 10 years this time for some ridiculous reason. But the one thing I do think is I'm not sure I want to go back to making games without a meaningful passage of time, because it's starting to feel a bit fake to me, and that's kind of sad because it's much easier to make games that way. But you know, even if they don't have a time looping structure, I want not taking a decision to be a significant thing for the player to do. I remember when I first played Assassin's Creed 2, I just joined the Sony studio and they gave me this game to play, and I didn't know anything about open world games. And I went to the first kind of mission dude who said, hey, I want you to go and kill this Italian guy. And there was a choice, and it was okay, no thanks. And I chose no thanks. I thought, I don't know, I'm not convinced I need to kill this guy. I'm not sure about that. And the guy said, come back when you've changed your mind. And I was like, oh, you don't really mean, do I actually want to kill this guy? You mean, do I want to kill this guy yet? That's not the same thing. That's not the same question. So yeah, I want choosing not to do something to be meaningful and significant. I want characters who get frustrated when I don't help them find their son and go off and look for help somewhere else. I want to feel like what I do matters, not because my numbers go up or another location opens or I get a +2 piece of sock armor or whatever, but because there was an opportunity not to do it, which means that when I do something, it actually matters and means something. That is what I want to do. Because I believe, as a storyteller, that time really equals consequence, and consequence tells stories. Thank you for listening. Sure.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you a lot for coming here to Carvalho. That is like amazing. Thank you for the talk. Was truly delightful listening to you, because I've been admiring you for a long time. I know all your games, and I thank you, because I think you are really pushing the medium forward. What you are doing, or your whole team are doing, and it's amazing, and thank you. I have so many questions, but I know that I can not say everything. I have two of I will choose one, and if I have time, I'll say the other one. The first one, you were talking about your narrative physics-like system. I think 4 years is very little time for what you're doing. I don't know how you are doing the QA of that game, because it breaks my mind. But I wanted to. You said that with a story you wanted to tell something. That's normal. That's fine. How do you not tell a lot of very different things with your story if your physics-like narrative? I mean, because how it's like very very reactive. I don't know, like procedural in some way. How you do not end telling the very different thing that you wanted to tell with Overboard, for example.
Yeah, so I just to make sure I've understood the question. So because we have this ability for things to cause other things to happen, how do we not have the story just spiral off in all sorts of random directions? Yeah, that's definitely, I think that's basically the craft of it, right? So if you're writing a kind of basic branching narrative, if you're just doing branches and joins and branches and joins, then the very simplest thing you can do is every choice takes you to a different thing, and very quickly your story becomes incredibly wide, but it's also very shallow. You take a choice, a choice, a choice. Oh, I've hit the end. There are 63 endings, but they're all 3 choices away, so no one cares, right? And as designers, different people have different ways of solving that problem, but for me it's always been about that constraint. So I give you choices so you can come out, and then the world kind of engineers the situation to bring you back to the point of focus, because that's my job as the writer, is to make sure that this world, this story is so strong and compelling and important that you're not actually able to break it, you're not actually able to ruin it. So one of the classic problems with any kind of real-time storytelling, and the reason that they don't put it into games like The Witcher and things like that, is that what do you do with the player who just literally sits at home and doesn't go anywhere, who does absolutely nothing? What do you do with that person? Because you can't make the story happen to them, and they won't, and they're refusing to do it themselves. And that's kind of like the extreme example of it. And sometimes we make games where the story will just attack that player anyway, and sometimes we just kind of force that player out of the room and say this is ridiculous. And there are different solutions depending on the story that you're telling, but it's a really important problem, and it's a really important thing to be paying attention to all the time. So in Expelled, the way that we deal with that is, well, partly we have very limited number of locations you can go to, so you can't board a ship and travel to India. That's just outside the scope of the game, and that's fine. But also we have a couple of adults in the room who will not be swayed by anything. So the headmistress and the matron, who are kind of the 2 people in charge of the school, there really isn't very little you can do to knock them off their schedule, because why would they be knocked off? Like, some kids tell them some random stuff, they're not going to change their day. And so they can brilliantly catch the player when they're in completely the wrong place and say, no, you need to be here right now. That's a wall, and it will put that wall in place, and it's narratively justified, and it feels fair, and people go, oh, that's a bit annoying, but on the other hand, the headmistress is supposed to be annoying, so it's okay. So yeah, I think there's no easy solution to it, but it's definitely like a good 50% of the process is making sure that you're constantly bringing it back in and constantly giving it focus. And I think players appreciate that, because when you're playing a game, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. So you do this and this and this because it seems like a good idea. And then if the story comes in and says, hey, you might want to go over there, actually, the player goes, oh, good, because I didn't know what I was doing. So off we go. And that's quite nice. I often think about theatre, as I said, but I often particularly think about improvised theatre. So I don't know if you've ever seen this sort of thing, but like they'll say to a bunch of, it's often comedy, to a bunch of actors, right, you're 2 pilots, you're on a plane, the plane's crashing, and one of you has stolen the other one's Game Boy, go. And there's no script, and they just have to perform it. And it's actually not that hard to do as an actor, you just do your stuff. But the really good people are the people who can keep the scene on track, because the easiest thing to do is just start randomly going off into an argument, and suddenly you forget that you're pilots, and you forget that there's a Game Boy, and and the thing peters out, it runs out of energy. But the really good improvisers will always bring it back to the beginning, and they always manage to find an end point, because they're solving the exact same problem of how do we balance branching out and going crazy with getting to where we need to be. And the last thing I'd like to say about that, because I appreciate I've used up almost all the question time on this one question, is that's the skill that all writers are using all the time. If you're writing a novel, your characters are always trying to bust out of whatever problem they're in, and your job as a writer is to force them back into that problem and make sure that the final fight between Macbeth and Macduff, or between Thor and Loki, or whatever it is, that's got to happen. And it's got to happen. It's got to feel like it had to happen. You can't let one of them just go, oh, I can't be bothered fighting my brother. I'm going to Barbados for a holiday, because then the story breaks. So you have to make sure that just isn't possible. So I actually don't think it's even a new skill to games. I think it's just a standard writing skill in a new context, which is to say writing's actually quite hard and people don't give it enough credit. Really. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk and for the games, and whatever she said, I said also. So yeah, that's nice. Maybe this is a silly question, so let me try to like ask it properly, because you talk a lot about systems and about players, and they are intertwined all the time. But in your process of making the design of the games, how much do you think about, okay, this is cool to make because this is a new system, because I want to experiment in this. I was thinking about this game, so I want to apply this on my game as well. Or this game is asking me to do this kind of thing. And how many times do you think about the player? Like, okay, I want the player to do this, and I want the player to experiment or to feel this, but maybe this system is not proper for this type of player, or this type of experience for the player. So I know they both are intertwined, but what comes first, like the chicken or the egg?
Okay.
The system or the player?
So you've got the systems and the desire to build interesting systems and the desire to give the player a good experience. And how do you get those two things to balance? I guess, I mean, yeah, you're right. They're intertwined and they feed off each other. And a lot of the time when you're making a game, you sort of build a bit of a system and you try it as a player, and you try to, you can't do it, but you try to wipe your brain and say, okay, imagine I've seen this for the first time. What don't I understand? What do I feel like I want to do that it's not letting me do? And how can we adapt the system so I can do that? How do I take the boundaries and pull them out? That kind of thing. But I think in terms of what comes first, the answer is neither of those things, ideally. Like, yeah, okay, fine. I'm a bit of a geek, and sometimes I'll build a system just because I like the look of the system. And then I go, what's this for? But that's rarely the best games. The best games are where you go, right, I want to make a game in which the player is an archaeologist. What does that mean? What does it mean for the player? Like, what does the player want to do to feel archaeological? And what does the system need to do to feel archaeological? So above both of those things should be, ideally, a kind of, I don't know what you call it exactly, a theme or an activity or a characterization or something which encompasses both of those things. And then you can start taking decisions, I guess, more confidently, because, yeah, okay, your system's terribly clever, but it's there for a reason, because it supports this thing. So I gave the game I was referencing about the archaeology is Heaven's Vault, of course, and like a core element of the system is that you can make a translation for something and it can be wrong and the game won't tell you. And people were very surprised about that from a systemic level. They were like, but that's not how puzzles work. You can't make puzzles that don't tell you when you've got them wrong. They got very cross about it. And you go, well, yeah, okay, but in archaeology, you can't get things right. That's not a thing that archaeologists ever can do, ever. Like, they can be confident about things, but they can't get it right, because no ancient Roman is going to turn up and say, you're absolutely right, that is what we did with that particular sword on a Tuesday. It's just never going to happen. So that particular bit of systemic design came out from that core idea that archaeology has to be permanently ambiguous. But then that also affects the player. Like, how does the player play with that? How do we make sure that they understand that the ambiguity is deliberate? And that kind of thing, which obviously for the players that complained, we failed, right? But like, I think for other players, we succeeded. So yeah, I try to think about the characterization first. And I think that feeds down to that thing I was saying about us making as little gameplay as possible. Because if you think that way, after a while, the extra gameplay starts to feel very unnecessary. So if you're making a game where you can pick up like equipment upgrades, like, how many equipment upgrades do you need before you stop feeling like a knight like a medieval knight. Like I'm in Elden Ring, I'm riding around, I'm some kind of fantasy knight, and I'm picking up this little hat, which has a little bit of bonus points on it. And I go, oh, that's a very good hat. That's a slightly better hat than the one I've got. I think I'll change my hat. Oh, but now I need to change my boots because they don't match my hat anymore. And now I need a big hammer, which is slightly faster than my other hammer. And maybe knights did this, but I really don't think they did. I think what they did was they got the only armor they could, and then they beefed up as much as they could, and then they went out into the world, and then they got killed. And that's the experience of being a knight. And every time I'm doing inventory management, I'm kind of, yeah, the game's fine, but like the fantasy is dying quietly. And it's just a question of how far you let that go. And people have different tolerances and stuff, but I'm very stubborn about that kind of thing.
Sadly, we ran out of time, so we have to leave it here. Thank you so much.